Welcome to the podcast from Eden Worship Center. Because we believe that it is God's Word that does God's work in God's people, we want you to hear the gospel preached in the gathering of believers. We want you to read it for yourself and to join us as we think together and talk together about the sermon from this past week and what's going on in our world. You can join the conversation by sending in your comments and questions to edenwc@hotmail.com. May God cause His Word to come alive in your heart today. All right, welcome everybody to the EWC Midweek podcast. Pastor Matt here in the office studio. We normally record this in our conference room, but it's a little chilly in there this morning, and we have some special guests with us on the podcast. So we're excited to have Destin and Jen Detwiler, members of Eden Worship Center, who are serving with To Every Tribe. Destin and Jen, welcome. Glad you guys are here.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Morning. You may hear it in Destin's voice. He is feeling deathly ill, and yet has chosen to come in and do this for the sake of your soul, good listener. So be encouraged. Destin and Jen, number one, good to have you here. It's always great when we get to see you guys, but also excited to hear a little bit more update than you were able to share in the 45 minutes on Sunday. If you missed it, Destin and Jen shared a little bit of a missions update on Sunday during the Sunday school hour. And I said something about, we're going to turn it over to you guys. And we got about 45 minutes and walked back to the seat. And I think Destin, it was your father-in-law, Mike Drake, although I'm a little fuzzy on remembering, who's like, you seriously think Destin's going to keep this to 45 minutes? I'm like, I got no hopes. Not holding my breath.
Usually I do pretty good, but I got on a couple of rabbit trails like right off the bat.
Even so, you guys wrapped it up like exactly right on time.
Yeah.
Man.
I think we went 3 minutes past.
Yeah.
Professionals. Professionals. That's what we got here.
Yeah.
So good to hear those kind of missions updates. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times those are just like mission work logistics. Mm-hmm. We went here. We were at, this village. We were with these people. We did this thing. And it really doesn't scratch down beneath that surface into the lived experience. Yes, but what's it like? What's it like to do that? For the people who love you, are praying for you, who support you. And that's kind of what I want us to do I know you're not feeling good, Destin, but in the next 4.5 hours, we're going to be together for this podcast.
You got this.
Yeah. No problem.
I might die.
But people will get to hear, prayers for healing and resurrection. It's going to be good.
Yeah.
The people will be encouraged. So you're serving with To Every Tribe in Northern Ontario. How long have you guys been in Northern Ontario?
4 years.
Yep.
In November. It'll be 4 years.
Yeah.
Or it was 4 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we got there November 9th of 2019.
Yep.
Okay. So just trying to think of like developing this idea a little bit. To Every Tribe has really focused on reaching unreached people groups. Mm-hmm. Why are you in Canada? Mm-hmm. Like what's the mission setup that has brought you to Canada? Because most of us don't hear Canada and go, remote, unreached people group. Mm-hmm. And yet that's not only the reality, it may be one step worse than that. Mm-hmm. Unreached people groups, you're going in with a brand new message, but you guys are going in where the message has been really broken. So give us, maybe for those who don't know, just a brief synopsis. Why Canada?
Yeah, so I guess Canada, especially with First Nation people, which would traditionally been called Indians, but the PC term, I guess, is First Nation, which is funny because they're totally fine with Indian. They're like, why do people keep changing our names? But
right,
or native,
or natives. Mm-hmm. But so the way we would talk about them in particular would be like misreached or underreached. And so because of the history of a lot of, like, I guess a term that gets thrown around a lot these days is colonization, because of because of that, there was a lot of resistance to the gospel. And so what we find in the areas that we work, there are maybe the older generation, the people that are in their maybe 60s to 80s, a lot of them would identify as Christian. But people that are younger than that, the majority of them wouldn't, especially the young people. There's definitely a push towards reconnecting with traditional native worship, something like animism,
Right.
a lot of,
Right.
and so they would.
So what is somebody just listening and they hear animism, they go, I'm not familiar with that term. What's animism?
Animism would have, I mean, it depends on the different tribes. You can have anything from ancestor worship to making offerings to nature or spirits. You're always trying to gain the favor, I guess, of the spirits. And so you're like up there, it would have been traditional to like make a tobacco offering. If you're ice fishing, you drill a hole, you throw a little tobacco in there.
Really?
Yeah, you're making an offering to the spirit, the river spirit, or they don't actually, like a lot of them don't know anymore why they do some of those things. They just know like this is what you do.
Yeah.
But behind it is generally you're asking spirits or the spirit world to give you fish, and you're giving something in return.
Yeah.
And so,
Or it might be smudging to ward off evil spirits or something like that.
So what would smudging be?
It'd be burning like sweetgrass, I think, is usually what it is, in like a shell. So, and then just kind of wafting it around the room to kind of ward off any evil spirits that might be in there, or
putting it over yourself.
Yeah.
Like to cleanse yourself if anyone tried to put a curse on you, or they tried, or if even if you did something wrong, it's a way to kind of atone, I guess, to cleanse yourself.
Yeah.
From the wrong that you've done or the evil that somebody, maybe they put that on you.
Yeah. So that's the natural sort of state of the native people who are up there, the First Nations people. And yet you describe them as being misreached. Talk about that a little bit. What does misreached mean? Not just unreached, like they haven't heard the gospel, they haven't heard of Jesus, but they've been misreached. What does that mean?
Well, so for like about 150 years, it was the policy of the Canadian government to take the Indian out of the child, to remove, to forcibly assimilate, or to make the native people become more white, to adopt their way of life, their way of dress, their way of speaking.
Sure.
And so the schools were run, they were funded by the government, but they were run by the churches, specifically the Anglican and Catholic churches, probably the most, and then the United Church, and even later on the Mennonites. There's a lot, and there's still a lot of Mennonites up there.
Yeah.
And so those schools went on for like 150 years, and the last ones closed in like 1996. And in those schools, they were disciplined if they spoke their language. They made the young boys cut their hair. They would traditionally have long hair, which in their culture, if you cut your hair, if you're a boy, the only time you would cut your hair is if you were grieving. And so here they take all these little boys from their communities when they're as young as 5 years old, and they put them on a plane and they ship them down to the school. And as soon as they get there, they cut all these boys' hair off.
Yeah.
Now the boys, all they can think is like maybe my mom died or maybe my dad died. And so, but the people running the school don't know that's how they perceive that being done to them, but they have a completely different worldview.
Yeah.
And so now they think like I'm going to take it from my family, and probably maybe one of them died.
Right.
And so, and now,
well, and so think animistic culture, animistic worship, where this is attached to grieving and death. you just forcibly, because you talked about it on Sunday. This isn't like a for the elites. You can go to this special school, like they're going into these remote villages, forcibly taking the children away, putting them in these schools, and then instantly attaching some idea of death to it. Death and grieving, and have I done something? This whole spirit thing, spirit appeasement. Have I done something that has turned all of that against me? And like it's an instant setup for failure. And the tragedy is it was attached with the name of Jesus Christ,
Right.
and the church.
Yeah, and there was a lot of sexual abuse that went on by the staff of these schools. There was, like I mentioned before, like the discipline if they spoke their language or tried to do any of their customs, and then they were also forced to dress a different way and all those sorts of things. So, and they couldn't retain their language. So I mean, we know, like, we've heard stories of a lot of people, like some of the people that are doing better in some of the communities, it's because every time whenever the plane would come to get the kids, the parents would take their family like way out in the bush,
Right.
for maybe like a week or two or whatever, so that they just weren't there when they came to get them. And so some of the kids never went through it because they would just go hide.
Able to get away from
Yeah,
it.
they just hide out in the bush, and they do that every year until.
But usually those people are directly connected to people that have gone through it.
Yeah,
though. So it's never
still impacts.
you're
them.
never not affected by it.
Yeah.
So
And so yeah, because of all the stuff that went on in those residential schools, it definitely made the gospel or in the name of Jesus like something that is like.
shameful.
Yeah, just something forced. It was forced on them, and so they. I don't know about you, but for me, like if somebody tries to force me to do something, I'm not.
Yeah.
That's not going to go very well.
Yeah.
But,
Well, especially if they come in and they don't look like you, and we'll talk about difficulties in a little bit. But one of the difficulties is the people who did that look like you.
Yeah.
And so they're coming from this culture, this native culture, and then you guys are coming in, and there's this instant attachment to that. But you guys didn't go straight from being members of Eden Worship Center to Northern Ontario.
No.
So Jen, what was the process in between there? What did you guys do?
So yeah, I mean, when we had decided that missions is what we wanted to do after our kids had moved out of the house, because we have 3 older children, we ended up selling everything and moving down to Texas.
It's the closest way to get to Canada.
Yeah. So go south.
Southern Texas.
Yeah. So we ended up moving down on the border of actually Texas and Mexico, and did 2 years of training down in Texas. So, and our training, even though some of it we thought was really difficult and challenging, was, 3 weeks in the classroom and then 1 week in Mexico. So we were kind of applying what we were learning in the classroom kind of immediately with the training that we went through.
What was the 1 week in Mexico about, maybe for people who don't know? So you had 3 weeks of classroom instruction, what people would think of in going to school, and then 1 week in Mexico.
Yeah.
What was the week in Mexico?
A lot of times it was like just really studying the culture that we were in, just learning what the people did, and just how to effectively be able to share the gospel with them. We wanted to have like spiritual conversations, and we wanted to build trust and build relationship. And so those were some of the main things that we worked on. We learned a lot of, just even how to, sleep in hard places.
So it wasn't like 4-star hotels.
No, far from that.
No, there was, how many was on our team? 6?
There was 6 of us.
Sometimes there'd be a couple with us, but we shared a little 2-bedroom house. Although we never really slept in any of those rooms. We slept in like the porch area.
It wasn't really safe to sleep in those rooms. No.
We ended up sleeping in on a cot with a bug tent on top of it. And when we first went in, they said, you definitely want a bug tent. And I'm like, it's not going to be that bad. And so we get there first night. I'm like, I made a huge mistake.
Mistakes were made.
And yeah. And
So there's no windows.
Yeah, there's no
there's
window.
bars where the windows are
screens
supposed
on
to
the
go,
window.
but there's
Okay.
no screens and no glass.
Right.
So, and some of the doors didn't quite shut all the way. So we'd have to put like coolers or tables in
Yeah.
front of the doors so that
To
we
keep
wouldn't
the
have
dogs
chickens
out.
and pigs
Yeah.
and dogs in our house at night.
Sometimes they'd still get in.
And sometimes, yeah. Sometimes our teammate, he woke up the one day with a big, nasty
Mangy
dog laying
Yeah.
next to him. So,
Well, chicken,
Yeah.
pigs, and dogs weren't the only obstacles, like the
Yeah.
cartels in that area. too.
yeah.
Yeah, so the first night I didn't bring my bug tent, and one of my teammates had a regular tent, and it was probably like 110 degrees in the house, and it was only 100 outside. So it's like, well, let's sleep outside. Except the tent was really only like a screen. We didn't put the rain fly on, so it was just a screen, and now we're outside. And we ended up in the backyard, which is all dirt. There's no grass anywhere.
Right.
And you would periodically wake up to dogs looking at you in the face or like chickens running around your tent. And yeah, there's people driving around. The village is literally in the middle of all these fields. It looks like the Great Plains. You can see for 5 to 10 miles in every direction. And the whole village is like maybe 5 blocks by 5 blocks. And there'd be people driving around with their bass playing, and they had ground effects, and we're like, oh, that's the cartel. And so we're in our tent, and like there's all these animals running around, and then you think the cartel's like gonna kill you in your sleep, and because it's a new place, new experience. You don't
Yeah.
really know what's good, what's bad, or what sounds are dangerous, what sounds are
Sure.
like. One of the things we learned down there, we were out with the mayor one day, touring a bunch of different places, and we were having a great time with him. And we heard a gunshot, and I didn't think anything of it. I mean, heck, sometimes on the weekends out where we lived, it sounded like World War III.
Right. Hunters out there doing their thing. And...
No, people firing automatic weapons and blowing
Oh,
stuff
wow.
up.
Or just like target practicing or whatever, you know.
Sorry, guys. But so gunshots for me were a normal thing that I'd hear every day. But down there, it means somebody's shooting at somebody else.
Yeah.
Because they took all the weapons from the farmers.
Oh, wow.
So nobody had guns. The only guys that have guns are bad guys. And
Yeah.
so if you hear a gunshot, it's serious and it means danger.
And you go back to your house.
And so we went back to the house.
Really
But
bad. Wow. Well, that's what I was thinking. Like around here, there's occasional times where it sounds like World War III is going on somewhere in the relatively close distance, but it's because it's opening day of whatever, and you know, there are people just hunting, and
Yeah.
down there, like it's totally different.
Yeah.
yeah, they don't even have guns to hunt anymore. So
Wow.
So yeah, you're just the first week you're there, you're just trying to get to understand.
And the whole point of being there, which it is great, we were talking about this a little before we started the podcast. To every tribe can't prepare you for every scenario, every situation you're going to have to walk into. But the idea was we're going to spend at least a quarter of the time teaching you to try and read the culture, read the people, read the room that you're in. How do I build relationships with them? How do I have conversations so I can get to the place where we're having spiritual conversations, so that you can get to the place where you're having gospel conversations? Like that's the whole point of going
Yeah.
to Mexico
Right.
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah, and we did a lot of door-to-door ministry, but it wasn't like door-to-door like you don't know people. We knew people, and we would go over to their house
Sure. Yeah.
and have some cookies and Mexican Coke with them or whatever, and we would have people over to our house for dinner.
Mexican Coca-Cola.
Yeah, Mexican Coke.
We're talking about the cartel here.
You know.
Yeah, and then it's like, like any part of training or going to a new country is all about getting used to being in a new place.
Yeah.
And so even things in Canada now that we used to do that would make you anxious or scary, or that you would maybe struggle with at first. Now it's just like, I mean, it's just what you do.
Yeah.
It's just part of your life now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of what the training in Mexico is to help with it, and that you're just getting, I always tell anyone, if anything, Mexico made it so like I can sleep anywhere or live anywhere, because it's like, well, if I can sleep in a tent in the backyard of a little Mexican village, or sleep in a house with like huge cockroaches flying in while you're eating dinner, and then you
just learn to flick them off your food.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I remember a teammate, we were sitting there eating, and all these bugs had flown in. These hornets had flown in, and one flies down and like stings him in the neck while we were eating. I think it was terrible for him, but we were all cracking up.
But we loved it.
It was great.
But
true camaraderie.
But it's like, I always like going into Mexico in class, there, like you're forging a sword, and you put it in the fire, and then you pull it out and bang on it to shape it. And going into Mexico is like putting it in the fire, right? And then you pull it back up, and you pound it into shape. And that was like those 3 weeks of class, you're trying to pound it into shape, and then you put it back in the fire.
Yeah.
And it's that forging process where you're kind of being, you're not just learning a bunch of information, but you're being tested. You're being you're being put to the test.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
what made you guys want to do that? Like, what led to you guys signing up to be missionaries?
Well, I would say a big thing was the place that I worked for 18 and a half years was named Mission Woodworking, and it was started by a couple that wanted to be involved in missions. They had went to a thing called Perspectives on World Mission.
Okay.
And they run those around here periodically. If you ever see one or you ever hear of one, I would recommend that you go. I haven't went myself, but I've heard a lot of good things. And generally what they do is they'll bring in 8, 10, 12 different missionaries, and they share on a specific topic, but they're also sharing some of their experiences. And what it's meant to do is give people a perspective on world missions, or a perspective of what God's doing globally.
Yeah.
So they had went to one of those, and they felt through that called to be involved in missions somehow. But both of them realized, like, we're probably not going to be missionaries, but we could support missionaries. And so through that, they felt that the Lord laid on their heart that they should start a business to support missionaries. And so...
And how long did you work there?
18 and a half years.
Yeah.
And so I worked with them for a long time, and we supported a lot of missionaries that would come in and share with us the work that they were doing in different places, and the work and what God was doing in different places. And we would get the chance as employees to give them, like, here's a check for thousands of dollars. And that the church that we were going to at the time had sent a church planting team to Senegal, West Africa. And so that was going on in our church. And so we got to hear kind of that whole process for them.
Sure.
Forming that team and going over there, and then people from our church going over there to visit them, and them coming to share with us. And periodically, when different missionaries came off the field, they would, they were just trying to get kind of reacclimated to being in the States, and they got to find a place to live, and they need a job. And so a lot of times they'd end up coming to work at Mission for a while, because it was a good work environment. You're kind of working in a Christian bubble. And that most of the people, especially early on, we all went to church together. We all worked together. And a lot of the missionaries were missionaries that came through our church. Yeah. And so...
Isn't that awesome? I'm just thinking, like, from the perspective of people listening to that, who maybe are saying in their hearts, like, yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to be a missionary. Like, maybe this doesn't apply to me, because, I mean, I'm interested in your story, but it's never going to be my story. Only the very first thing that you point to in that missions experience is a work environment where people weren't missionaries, but they had such a heart for it that it literally shaped the direction of your life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great encouragement to us as local missionaries, which we're all called to be. Live your life, live your family, live your business in such a way where you are directed towards the gospel and the kingdom of God. And like, that's just encouraging. I think that's great.
Yeah.
We
So-
also tried to have, whenever missionaries would come to visit, we usually tried to have them stay in our home too. It was just a great opportunity for even our kids to, hear what's going on in their lives and what mission
Yeah.
life looked like.
Yeah.
And so that was something we always looked forward to.
Yeah.
Well, and a couple of those guys were people that kind of poured into me too, and that I looked up to. And there's kind of that saying, birds of a feather flock together. And, we were doing life with people that were involved in missions. So it kind of rubs off on you.
Yeah.
And I always tell people too that your life is a story, and your life is telling something about God's story. It's telling something about the glory of God. And so we always thought it'd be a great story that having work there, then becoming a missionary that they support,
Right.
that would be a great story, and it would glorify God. And so that was something that we, I guess, aspired to and tried to grow into it. I mean, it took 18 and a half years, but but it was something that was always kind of out there.
Yeah. Which, as long as I've known you, that it's been something at the forefront that you guys have talked about. Like, yep, we want to do this someday. We want to do this. And then the day comes that you do it. Like, we actually have to sell our house. We actually have to move away. What was the hardest part for you guys in doing that? Like, what was the most difficult thing in making that leap from that which we want to do someday to that which we're doing?
Probably the fear of the unknown, kind of jumping into something that you don't know.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, it's just very difficult being away from our kids, our families, our grandkids. Like, those are the things that are by far the hardest for me personally.
Well, and the
So,
grandkids have all come in that window of
yeah,
time.
yeah, for sure. So, yep, it's learning how to be a grandma when you're hundreds and hundreds of miles away, you know, what that looks like. So, yeah, we've tried really hard to keep a close relationship with our babies.
Yeah, I would say being away from family is definitely hard, especially if there's anything happening at all that you can't be there for. That's definitely difficult. And I think another thing initially is just making the transition when we did in our life. We went to the field, like I think we'd only been at Every Tribe a couple months when I turned 40 years old.
Oh, okay.
And so that's not the typical mission path. A lot of times you find people that are in their like early to late 20s.
Yeah.
They're either just starting out in life or they finished college, got married, and had a couple kids, and now this is what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And so now for us, making that transition as 40-year-olds, and we had never not had children. Like, we had Seth was born a few weeks before he got married, and then we never had this time as a couple to be together without children. And so we were doing that for the first time at 40 years old, and now far away from the place that we had lived in our whole life. I mean, we always lived in Elkhart County, and my whole family had since for like 5 generations. And so, but it was actually really good, like going down there. I mean, it was a great being down there for 2 years. It was kind of like, I guess maybe for us, like being in college or something, because we didn't have that experience. But Now we were having that at 40. And so making that transition from changing careers, I would say, it was for me, that was difficult because, and I shared this a while back in October. One of the last things that I did before we went on home assignment was we had this big roundtable discussion with another ministry to see if we could work together in how maybe we're doing some things they could learn from and they're doing some things we could learn from, or ways that we could work together. And one of the questions was something like what's working for you, what's not working. And I was explaining the difficulty of being in the profession I was before. I did every job in that whole place because I had worked there for so long, and I became the plant manager. And it was like, I knew how to do everything. Like I could do it in my sleep. And and I was telling these guys this at the table, that there wasn't a lot of days that we didn't accomplish what we set out to do.
Yeah.
Like if we knew what we needed to do, like we could get it done.
Yep.
Like I could get it done. And I would make sure that it got done, even if I had to stay longer, other people had to stay longer or whatever. And now to transition from that into missions where like sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you work at something.
Yeah.
Like you can't accomplish it.
Yeah.
And so that has been difficult. Cause in the factory life, if you give it your best, you can do it.
Yeah.
But like in missions, you're totally dependent on God has to work,
Yeah.
and if he doesn't,
Yeah.
you're just spinning your wheels.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's not some woodworking project that's sitting in front of you. It's people, it's lives, it's families,
yeah.
and so difficult. Which I think that kind of leads to a good question. Like, what were some of those things that you anticipated about what that life and ministry and missions was going to look like? Maybe what were some of the things that you anticipated? You're like, I can't believe we even thought that. And what were some of the things, like maybe you were right or you were surprised by?
Yeah, you go first.
You go first. You go first.
I've been talking a bunch. So.
Oh man. I mean, one of the things that really kind of threw a wrench in it was COVID,
Sure.
because we got there 3 months before COVID,
Yeah.
global pandemic hit. So yeah, we didn't plan for that one for sure.
You have this idea. I'm going to go and
Yeah.
connect with people, build these relationships,
Yeah.
share the gospel. It's going to
Yeah.
be tough. And then you get there and you can't talk to people.
Yeah, we literally can't go out of our house, or we can't literally have people over to our house, or we could get arrested or be fined, or yeah, I mean, it really made things really tricky and difficult.
Yeah.
So, another thing is we just had spent 2 years down in Texas with a very warm culture, environment, like as in hot Texas, but
Yeah.
as in also like a warm, hospitable people. And so then we're going up to Canada, and it matches the environment there, I mean, like it's a colder culture, like the people aren't as inviting, so like we're having to be a lot more intentional about reaching out to other people. But then with COVID, then it makes it a whole lot difficult then too,
Yeah.
It's just like we really struggled to, make connections or like even have friendships right at first, just because of, we were so thankful for our team that was there in Canada with us. I mean, I think, like, I don't even know if we would have stayed on the field for
Sure.
for this long.
Sure.
Well, we
not had
were
a
all in
team.
like a fourplex or a quadplex.
Yeah.
And so like we could like sneak over to each other's houses during COVID because like
Yeah.
we don't have to take our
We're all
car
in the same building.
and you're all in the same building, and it's like you just need to spend time with somebody and you can just have them like wait till dark and they can walk over and
Yeah.
And in defense of, I think, of Sioux Lookout culture, I think going there we didn't realize the dynamic, but once you understand it, it makes sense a little. And that is that so how Canada works, and it's basically how we ended up in a place like Sioux Lookout is if you want to move there as a refugee or an immigrant, you have to prove that you're not taking a job from a Canadian. And so oftentimes you have to work in a place like Sioux Lookout because it's remote. It's in the far north. It's cold. And Canadians don't want those jobs. So so kind of how it works, whether it be for teachers, they have a program called Teach for Canada, pilots, nurses, whoever it is, they end up doing their first like tour of duty, so to speak, in a place like Sioux Lookout. And so most of our nurses they're on a 3-month contract in there.
Wow.
So every 3 months they're rolling over a ton of nurses. Our pilots, when they get a certain amount of hours in, they're off to another place.
They might only be there for a month, or not a month, but a summer. Yeah.
Then they get enough hours and they go to where they can have a better opportunity and make more money. Yeah. And so little towns like Sioux, they're all over Canada. They end up getting kind of used that way.
Sure.
By the Canadian citizens, and then the immigrants coming in, it's their first place they've ever worked. And then and so they'll work at like Tim Hortons or the grocery store or whatever.
Don't say Tim Hortons. We don't have those around here.
I know.
Just makes me sad.
They'll end up.
There's one in Fort Wayne.
The best coffee.
It is.
Large double.
Yeah, if you're ever there, double.
Yes.
Yep.
You're welcome.
We still look for them down here if we can find them. Like, we prefer it to anything else. And so what happens to the church and the community, but we see it in the church because that's where we spend more time, is that people get fatigued by constant turnover of people and seeing new faces and trying to build relationships and then having to say goodbye. Yeah. And so they're a little bit more standoffish because they're trying to protect themselves from being, maybe hurt again from learning to care about somebody or invite them into their home. And now because they're just going to leave. Yeah. They're just going to leave. And so that's what makes it a little bit, I think, more standoffish. And I've definitely tried to challenge them on that, but it's hard to push through that. Yeah. When some of the people that's been my experience for 4 years. That's been their experience for 60 years, you know? And it's like, they just kind of you just kind of get numb to it.
Yeah. And that's you brought up a really good thing that it's a difficult dynamic that you're just kind of stuck with up there. This sort of temporary type of culture where you're here and I don't even know if I want to bother learning your name because I'm going to get to know you, I'm going to care about you, and then you're going to be gone. Mixed with the whole cultural thing where people who look like us have gone into their culture and done lots of damage. So not only is it temporary, but I'm not even sure I can trust you. And then a third dynamic, which I think has been a really difficult one you guys have had to work through, is the whole thing of the hopelessness, the suicide rates in those areas are astronomical compared to what we know around here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, like, depending on the more people you know, the more often that kind of stuff happens. But it's not uncommon to deal with something like that on a weekly basis, going on somewhere.
Wow.
Or daily.
And another piece about Sioux, I think because people live here, it gives them a little bit of insight into it, is that here you kind of have the English and Amish cultures kind of side by side. Sure. And there's some overlap, but there's also there's a line of distinction, where they have gatherings and they have their whole culture. And sometimes we get invited into that, like go to an Amish wedding or something, right? Yeah. But, and it's the same thing in Sioux where you have kind of like, there's actually 3, I would say, cultures in Sioux. And that is, you have the kind of the white, long time Canadian residents of Sioux. You have your First Nation community. And then you have this like, kind of like immigrant or migrant kind of people that are just temporary culture, and those three things they're kind of their own separate thing, and they intersect, but they don't always mingle together real
but
well.
there's also really clear lines of distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to the suicide and the darkness and all that kind of stuff. There's a term that gets thrown around there, up there a lot, and that is compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
Isn't that the term?
Yep. Yep.
And just that, and you see it in everyone. I mean, you see it in people that are doing ministry. We see it in the police.
Sure.
We see it in
The nurses.
the nursing and hospital staff, where you've just seen so much death and so much attempted suicide and fighting and drug abuse and alcoholism and all that kind of stuff. You can easily become jaded
Yeah.
to it.
Well, you guys mentioned something on Sunday, and I thought this is so far outside of the box of what most of the people sitting in that room had ever experienced, myself included. And I feel like I end up in the mess a lot. But you mentioned having a neighbor who has been dealing with suicidal ideations and also suicidal attempts every weekend for 8 weeks straight. And my thought was, I'll bet no one else in this room has had that experience.
Yeah.
And Jen, you said it as if it's just like, well, yeah, I mean, that's what it was like. It was tough. It was rough.
Yeah.
It is rough.
It
it's a
is.
current ongoing thing. But,
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys have felt some of that compassion, it's not just fatigue, it's exhaustion.
Yeah, you're exhausted. Yeah. To where you have a little bit of anxiety every time you have a message on your phone.
Yeah.
You're like, oh no, what happened?
Oh man,
you
here
know?
we go.
So yeah. And then like we have it, maybe every weekend, but like we have friends up in different communities that deal with it every day.
Yeah.
And every night, multiple times a night, and I mean, yeah, it can cause serious health problems too, that like our friend just had a stroke from dealing with a lot of stress and
the doctor said it was
so,
from stress.
yeah,
just
so
the
it's
stress
just
of prime
you
ministry.
feel it. You definitely feel it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but
So there's a lot of darkness in that area, and it's an immersive darkness. Like it's all around. So it's probably also good to remind ourselves that there's been some good times in ministry. What have been some good things that have happened that have kind of surprised you, where you're like, man, I didn't really anticipate God using that situation like that, or something like that.
I would say probably during COVID. So like I'm an introverted person. I love being by myself. I probably thrive in that. So like I feel like God made me for this. but I mean I need people too. So when we when COVID was going on, it kind of threw a wrench in like all of our plans, as far as our hope was to really work with a lot of the high school kids that were coming down from all of the communities to go to our town to go to high school.
Sure.
That didn't happen because all of the schools were shut down. So we ended up being able to build relationship with their grandparents and their parents. And that time was a really sweet time of building new friendships and meeting new brothers and sisters in the Lord, our native brothers and sisters in the Lord that we had never met before or knew about, but just got to know in a deeper way. We got to go with one couple to build a shed for them on their traditional campground area and our trap line. And it was,
But she said campground. It's not like
I'm sorry. That's not.
It's you have to
Not
fly
the
there by
proper
plane,
term.
and there's no other
Yeah.
cabins
You get
around
dropped
there.
off and you're like miles and miles from any.
We flew an hour and a half with a load of lumber in
Yeah.
a float plane, and then we had to unload the lumber
I guess not your
on a
traditional
dock
campground.
and throw it in a boat and drive it over and unload it and carry it over to where we
Yeah.
were building this thing.
Right.
Yeah.
On this piece of ground on which we were camping.
Yes.
That we were sleeping
Yes.
sleeping in a tent. Yeah.
Yeah.
With all of God's creation.
As opposed to
And creatures.
The thing I can't wrap my head around it. 'Cause the whole idea of camping is generally we're going to get away. We're going to, just sort of alone in nature. And then they go to these campgrounds where the neighbor is 8 feet from you.
Yes.
And it's the least alone you're going to be
Yeah,
for
for
an
sure.
entire year.
For sure.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
That one makes sense to me.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
not
I mean,
the local one here.
there was no, there's an outhouse and you drank water out of the lake.
And
You took a bath in the lake, if you took a bath.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
but we got to do that in 2020 because there wasn't a lot we could do, and we could fly in there because it was just like, well, get a COVID test, and it's like, well, we don't have it, so
Yeah.
and then we're just hanging out for a week
Yeah.
out in the bush. And
But then we also did a lot of fishing and taking people fish. So like that's a big, like the culture is big into gift giving, and so we would take a lot of our native elders or just friends into Lookout. Like we would just take them fish, banana bread or whatever, just to be able to have a connection point with them.
Yeah.
And that was a huge relationship building activity that we did
And still do.
and still do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we enjoy doing. So it was just cool that it was something that God used to build relationship.
although it's not as much as that sounds fun, it does get kind of like, oh, I'm cleaning fish for somebody else again tonight. Like
It can be work.
I want to just go.
Yes.
I just want to go sit in the house and watch a baseball game or something. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
should have thrown all those fish back, but
Yeah. Yeah.
We're a
It's like-
catch and release boat.
yeah,
Yes.
like
Or we
yeah.
deliver whole fish.
Yeah,
That's it.
yes. Which,
And then they're like, I don't know
that's
how to
okay
do
too.
it, and I'm like, what? I'll show you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
That one's a great one, though, because, I mean, anybody who knew you guys before you left knew that if you want to magically catch a fish, go out with Destin. Now that you guys live in Canada, they say that about Seth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's just something genetically built in and interesting that God would use that, that just natural things
Yeah.
that would be that connection point for building relationships. Because you get those, especially those guys, and periodically if somebody follows you on your Facebook page, you'll see it. Young guys get them out in a boat. Well, for the next couple hours, like you have a captive audience for building relationship and working towards having spiritual conversations. So that's just awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was, none of that was by accident either. My uncle owned a fishing resort, and we went there all the time as a kid. That's named Ojibwe.
Oh,
Resort.
no kidding.
And they're right outside the Leech Lake Band of folks.
And Ojibwe is what to you guys?
So Ojibwe, the two groups of First Nation people we work with are Ojibwe and Ojibwe. And so, I mean, I grew up going to a town that was a reservation, that still is a reservation for the Ojibwe in northern Minnesota. And so that's how I learned how to fish. And I guess I've been around Native people, a lot of my life, I guess. But I mean, that was pretty indirectly. I mean, it would just be run into people at the bait shop and the grocery store and whatnot. But
it wasn't anything where you're like, well, I want to be a missionary, so I'm going to go to my family's, fishing camp.
it was actually one of those things, like when we were considering doing this, I'm like, I'm not going to go to do ministry with Native Americans, because it's like, that just seems like not enough of a stretch.
Yeah.
Like when you think
These
like,
are
oh,
all
I'm going
things
to,
we like to do.
I'm going to go be a missionary. It's going to be the other side of the world, and it's going to be all these unknowns and everything. And it's like, well, I know how to do a lot of this stuff. Like, so, but
Which
then
it
I think
is a lot of the unknown.
But I think when you get into it, then you realize like, well, it's good that I have some of those things, because all this other stuff is really hard,
Yeah.
And so some surprising things for me that have been good is I have a really good friend now that actually it's been really hard for me to make friends in the culture, just because of the past and the history. But Jen has a lot more. Guys are just way more standoffish. But I think it was a couple winters ago. I can't remember if it was last winter or the winter before.
It was 2 years ago.
I came back and from being down here visiting family, and it had snowed a ton.
Oh, right.
And I had my snowmobile trailer out there, and it had got plowed in, and it was I think that winter we got 12 feet of snow, and by the time we got home there was already like 3 or 4 feet of snow, and so everything we owned was buried, and I'm out there just like frustratingly shoveling this, and that's by now it's like packed and frozen.
Right. Well, because it's not like getting a couple feet of snow here, which we do, and then it'll be 34 degrees one day and most of it melts, and melt thaw, all that sort of stuff. No,
It stays.
you get to keep it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the gift that keeps
Yeah,
on.
it
Yes.
starts snowing in November, and the snow doesn't finally melt until like the middle of May.
You're right.
So you're dealing with at least 6 or 7 months of snow.
Yeah.
And so I was just shoveling, and a native guy was walking down the street. I think a guy that Jen had talked to several times when she'd be working in the garden, but he sees me and he's like, "Hey, you need a hand?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." He's like, "Yeah, an extra shovel?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so
Right on.
I'm like, "This is really strange. I mean, to offer to," and so he helped me shovel a bunch, and then I invited him in for tea. He didn't take me up on the offer, but so that it took a while, even after that, for him to come to the place where it's like, "Hey, come in and have some tea." But that relationship's been different because it started off by him helping me,
Right.
whereas a lot of relationships are a struggle because it feels really one-sided,
Yeah.
and that there's things they only want me because of something I can do for them or give them, and for him, he's been a friend because there's give and take.
That's awesome.
And so he's somebody that's been encouraging to me. We have another friend too that she's probably our best friend, and she's taught us a lot about the culture, and she's somebody that Jen met on a plane flying back from Cat Lake, and she just started talking to Jen, and I don't know how you got her number or Facebook.
Jen, the introvert,
Facebook friend.
Yeah.
or-
getting people's numbers on an airplane.
Yeah. Getting
And
me out of my comfort zone.
I just try and avoid eye contact on airplanes.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody does up there. So
So she kind of made this
she's
friend.
kind of an
and
out of the box
She's a little bit different,
native lady.
and
So
but she's been tremendously helpful to us, and just in teaching us
Yeah.
a lot about history and culture and language and stories, and how the local government works, and how the local government interfaces with the national government, and all these things that we would have no
Yeah.
way of learning. She's been a good teacher for us and a good friend. And
but even with her, it took us 2 years before she invited us into her house. It took 2 years of us standing on her porch, bringing her fish and whatever.
yeah, she would, or Jen
And-
making a dessert,
or she'd come to our house, fine. But
Yeah,
it took 2 years for us to be invited into her house.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, and now we've been invited in several times now. But so those have been a couple of really good relationships that we have that have been a blessing. And we have a few more. We have more too with people up north. We just don't get to see them as often.
Yeah.
But we've had people that have taken us out to their family trap line where they've been going for generations, and take us like moose hunting or fishing, and
Yeah.
and they're excited. They're excited to show us their land and their some of their cultural practices, teaching Jen how to cut up moose meat, or how to pluck a a duck or
Shooting
go partridge hunting. She
partridge
got to
hunting
be
with
in,
slingshots.
yeah, partridge are, we call them
Which I'm terrible at.
like rough grouse. We call them, they're really grouse, but they hunt with slingshots, and they're like, but they've been doing it since they
They
could
are
pull a
snipers.
slingshot back.
Right.
And they'll go out with a slingshot and kill like 10 of them.
Hit them right in the head. I'm like, I can't even.
And they just pick.
It hit in the area that it's in.
Yeah, they pick up rocks, like a handful of rocks off the ground. I mean, they're not using like fancy, like stainless steel balls or
Yes.
like
Right.
marbles or anything. It's just like you kind of get an idea of which rocks are the best size and the right size. And
Yeah.
but Jen gets invited into more of that kind of stuff just because they're way quicker to invite her in than me, which is hard sometimes. I see the stuff they're doing, and I'm like, man, I'd like to do that with them, but
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, they just don't see me that way.
But yeah, also like they've taught me how to do a lot of like the beadwork and how to make moccasins and earrings and all different kinds of things, and that's been really fun because it's also something like I really enjoy doing. So yeah, it's a great relationship building activity that, yeah, it feels like life-giving. It brings
Yeah.
me joy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, Jen's you have learned how to do like not just painting, but the earrings. You kind of learned how to make, a lady taught her how to make earrings and stuff out of birch. I mean, she's learned a lot of things.
If you haven't seen Jen's artwork, you need to check it out. Jen, talk a little bit about that whole thing of like painting and artwork. And I mean, I know COVID and lockdowns kind of led you to it, but
So yeah, I mean, for me, 17 years, I did interior painting and exterior painting and drywall finishing and all that. So like I was familiar, with that realm of painting, but I've never done like, like small paintings,
Sure.
And so like during COVID, we were just kind of stuck in our house. And so I just kind of started exploring that, and it was something I found that I was fairly good at and enjoyed doing, and have continued to do. It's actually been a really great opportunity for me to do paintings and different things for some of the elders. I've done stuff in Cat Lake and Muskrat Dam and Round Lake. And so, yeah, it's just a really great way to connect with some of the people there too. I literally had a time in one of the communities where I had a person that didn't speak to me the whole time I was there. And then after I gave them one of these gifts, like it was just like all of the walls were down and they just like poured out their heart with me, and I was able to pray with them. And you know what I mean? So it was just,
And that was
and this was of another believer.
yeah,
Wow.
and
So,
not just a believer,
yeah.
but like a leader in the
Like,
church,
yeah,
And
yeah.
so there's still those walls are there. even
Yeah,
for
so it was
them.
just, I don't know, it's just something about giving gifts is just like huge in their culture. And so
We kind of learned in that one we should give those
gifts on the
gifts on the
first
front
day.
end of the trip. But the thing is, like, that was our
yeah,
first time,
right.
like,
there.
like,
Yeah.
well, we had been through there before, and we had stopped and visited like one family that we knew a few times, but this was the first time that we were actually spending time there. And we didn't know, like, we don't want to just go randomly give gifts to people that we don't
Yeah.
know. And so, like, it was kind of like building a relationship throughout the week so that we could see, oh, who would I like to give something to? And then that kind of,
Yeah.
but then that kind of opens the door for those relationships in the future. But, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think another reason why like the painting was so appealing to me was just that in ministry, a lot of times you never see the fruit of what you're doing.
Sure.
You don't get to see that finished product. And so like with the painting, it was like a very tangible, like, I'm starting with this blank canvas and now it's just this beautiful piece of art,
Yeah.
and so, and it's done and it's complete and now I can give it to somebody and it like makes them happy, makes me happy, you know? So like, I feel like that was like, in a way, a little piece of something I feel like is missing sometimes from
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
our actual life, you know? And so, yeah, for me, that is one thing that was a really good thing.
Yeah. Well, we talked, I mean, a little bit earlier about that whole thing of like, so what were some of your things you anticipated going into ministry? And so often, because you have to start with a foundation, there's a lot of like theological work. There's a lot of like, how do I rightly handle God's word? How, you know, how do I study God's word? How do I present God's word to somebody? But ministry is very rarely just a sermon. You know, where, okay, it's like the painting. I'm preparing for it. I'm painting it, and here's the finished product. And I thought this was important to point out maybe to people who are listening. Most of the ministry you guys have described is relationships.
Right.
And building those relationships, building trust, building those avenues for gospel conversations. And the good news about that is that's something that people listening to this, again, who go, I'm probably never going to be a missionary, they can do right now. Like they can be building relationships right now. You're a local missionary. Build those relationships where God has you.
Yeah. Well, before I get into that, I'd like to, like, one of the things, like, I had a neighbor that did that really good for us growing up, and he was really good at loving his neighbor.
Yeah.
And like, he even had a backhoe that he, like, everything that he did, everything he had, he used to love his neighbor, whether it be his tractor or his backhoe. I mean, he would come over and help remodel my parents' basement, help build our barn. He would dig stuff, big holes for us when we needed, because he had a machine. And he did that for everybody, though, not just my family. And that was his way of I think, you know, building, not just building trust, but it gives you, like, you need a reason sometimes to be involved in somebody's life. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just, like, especially now, people are so busy, and like giving of yourself to help somebody, like do all those projects and things. Like, he was on the police force for maybe 25 years, and when he moved up there, he was retired, but he's basically been retired like as long as I could have known him, which is, I think he moved up there when I was 10, and now I'm 46. And so, but he's always worked and been busy at stuff. And so he did a really good job, I think, modeling that for me, you know, just how to make some of those inroads into people's lives. But I know I lost the question now, but it was like, what did we expect going up there versus what was the question?
Yeah, I mean, there's just expectations that go in. Maybe a better question is, with all those expectations, what are some of the roadblocks that you guys have hit that either you saw coming or you didn't see coming, like obstacles to ministry?
Well, one of the things that we learned in our training, and this was like, I mean, it's one quote that I always remember, is unrealistic expectations are premeditated resentments. Except,
dang, that's good.
And it is good, but the problem is it's very difficult for you to not have unrealistic expectations, because if you're doing something you've never done, you have no idea what to expect. Like, we never moved to a different country or lived in another culture or had to try to learn another language. And so going through our training, we got a glimpse of that, but then we moved to a completely different place.
Sure.
You know, you're basically moving from Mexico to Canada, and those are vastly different. But, and so I think one of the things I struggled with big time, and I probably still do to some degree, is that, you know, when COVID hit, it just shut everything down for like a year and a half. I mean, it was a long time.
At least.
It was a long
longer
time.
than that.
Especially up there.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 years. And it's
and then
like,
the communities.
and so
it's
part of that
more,
is,
yeah.
and I've mentioned this before at church, but there's like it's easy to have some again, like you said, unrealistic expectations are premeditated resentments. But some of that resentment, I probably struggled to not have some resentment toward God in a way, because it's like, I've been planning on doing this for a long time, you know, and now you make all these plans and you try to set up everything as well as you can, and you end up moving to a new country like 3 months ahead of like this life altering global pandemic. And it's like,
Right.
man, like how did that have to be our story? You know, like, it's already hard enough as it is. And, you know, trying to fight through like the fact that God knows all that's going to happen before
Right.
you do it.
Right.
And there's been other things, I mean, along the way. I mean, 2 weeks, and I'm not going to get into this story big time, but 2 weeks into our training, we found out like the president of the ministry was no longer with the ministry. And it was like, wait, I just sold all my stuff and moved away from my family and quit the job I had worked for a really long time. And so there's been a lot of things that we didn't expect that just kind of knock the wind out of you a little bit. And so you got to try to fight through those. I think, I mean, obviously praying through those things, but also being able to kind of talk through that with your missionary teammates. And we're fortunate to have 3 families that had lived in Canada for years by the time we got there. And so, and they're all going through it with you.
Sure.
You know, they're in the trenches with you, and everybody's kind of, they're experiencing that to some degree. And so being able to talk through that together and pray through that together and talk each other off the ledge, so to speak. You know, some days you just have really bad days, or you're really having a really hard time, and you can just like reach out to them, call them, and they can pray for you and kind of share the gospel with you and share scripture with you. And then other days you're doing that, you know, you're doing that with them and trying to encourage them. And so that's what makes it really good to have a team. Because like, you know, the Ecclesiastes, you know, if a person falls and there's no one to pick them up, you know, kind of like, woe to that man. But if two or three go together, you know, you got somebody to help pick you up when you fall down. And so
it's a great verse. Like, we often hear that at weddings, you know, but a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And then we usually go, oh, see how much they love each other. Like, aren't you glad they have each other now? And that's not the point of that. The point is, yes, you have each other, and you desperately need other people. Like that's the whole point of that. Like, we need other believers in our life to hold us up when we are down. And that especially that's true for you guys as you stand in this remote place and go like, yeah, we can't stand there alone. That's a rough place to be.
They need us too. Like, you know, as much as you don't want to be like proudful about that, but like, we have things that, you know, we can offer other people too, just to be that encouragement and stuff. You know, we need to like burden each other. So
we've grown really close with our pastor up there and his wife. They're like probably with our teammates, Tondina, Simpson, and Muskrat, like those are our closest. I mean, it's oftentimes people that are still close to you in age. We're all pretty close in age, and in life experience.
Sure.
But they've been a tremendous help to us when we are going through difficult ministry things, or people that we care about are going through difficult things, and it's just like a really bad day. And you just need somebody to kind of I don't know,
hold up your arms.
Just hold up your arms, or just to kind of verbally process like, this is, you know, this really stinks, you know, whatever. And and somebody it's good when you have people to,
or you'll get a call from like Jonas or somebody, like when you're having a bad week or month, or no, I'm just kidding.
Year.
But it's great to have people to like this, like
Yeah.
Jesus said, you know, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. And, you know, community,
Yeah.
your community is important. And so those are the people that help get you through some of those difficult things that you maybe didn't expect to go through.
Sure.
And I think going there, you know, we knew like it was going to be hard. And we knew that it was going to be dark and there's going to be things that were discouraging, but it was more of all those things than what we expected. I think especially with COVID and now you're not getting to do like, cause we were one of the first groups of missionaries sent out from to every tribe where we actually had like a job description.
Okay.
Where it's like, here's the different needs on the different fields. And then are these things that kind of fit your skill set and your, maybe your job experience or whatnot. And so going up there, we had worked a couple of times here in another church doing youth ministry, and we had raised our children. And so now we're going to go work with all these high school students. And then 3 or 4 months in, the school shut down until the spring of this year.
Good grief.
So like they didn't have school for 2 years, and then in 2023 they basically, or 22 and 23, they just didn't allow any outside visitors. And so now that they actually made a plan, right, for here's how you're going to go, here's what you're going to do, here's where you're going to do it. We couldn't do any of it. And so then there starts to be this struggle in my mind between, there's kind of the struggle between kind of the things that you're enduring and the fruit that you're seeing.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, I feel like if those two things are being equal, then you're like, yeah, this is totally worth it. But if it feels like there's just a lot of frustration and difficulty and hardship, and there's not a whole lot of open doors, there's not a whole lot of fruit of your ministry, then it's like, well, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
You know? And I think, so that's kind of I think what you call an existential crisis, you know, to where it's like your expectation was you're going to do this certain job, and that you're going to, hopefully if you do that faithfully enough, long enough, that it's going to have an impact, and that maybe you'll see people come to Christ, and they'll become a new creation in Christ, and they'll start living a Christian life, and you're walking with them doing that. But when you don't see that, it starts to be like, you know, you start weighing those things out, and you're like, is it worth it? You know? And and so that's, I guess, some of the things, you know, when your expectations don't line up with your reality, you start asking yourself some of those hard questions.
Yeah. Which is one of the important things. And I just keep thinking there's so many parallels between you and us listening to it. We all have times where we go in with a certain expectation, and then we get there and we go, this isn't it.
Yeah.
This isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I signed up for. God, I'm struggling to hold on to this idea that you're good, and yet you put me in this. And I just love that idea of those unreal expectations. It's premeditating. It's setting the stage for us to have bitterness. And bitterness at people, bitterness at God. And how quickly, when we find ourselves there, we have to stop and reorient, get our expectations right. Like that's not a blank check for us to like check out. Like, man, not what I expected. I don't want to get bitter. I'm leaving right now.
Yeah.
No, I have to adjust my expectations, you know, go back before the Lord. Okay, God, help me see this really, really clearly.
Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe get those things down on paper. Like, here's what we expect. Here's what it looks like for us now. And man, I'm thinking of a couple situations that I know are going on in people's lives, and just thinking that's what they're doing on a daily basis. And it's the same thing that you guys are doing in Canada.
I feel like there was a point, I don't even know exactly when it was, but I know like I was very discouraged. I did not want to be there. I didn't want to be in Canada at all. And the pastor's wife, I met with her the one day, and we just sat down and cried together and prayed together, and it was wonderful. And then I started going through this study of Joshua in the Bible, and God just I feel like he just spoke to me through, his word and stuff, and just realizing how important it is for us to remember who God is.
Yeah.
And if I have to make a pile of rocks in the corner of my house to remember what he's done in our life and why we're here, and then we need to do that. And I just, through that study, God just really did a work in my heart through that, and it's me.
Yeah.
It's not him. So
it just makes me think of the words to that old hymn. Here I raise my Ebenezer.
yes.
My
Yes.
pile of rocks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we go, here's why I did this, because here, where I am right now, by your great help I've come. Like the only reason I've come this far is your great help.
Yeah.
I need a big pile of rocks in the corner to remind myself.
Because we can take that little quarter and put it right here, and it can completely block out the sun, like Harold tells that story.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that story, because we have to make sure we have everything in perspective.
Yeah.
We have a big God who can solve these big problems, but in our own little eyes, it seems very big and very hopeless. So
Well, and I think in that too, we're just like Israel, in that like every time they went to battle another enemy, it's like they forget that God was the one who won that battle for them before. Now it's like they're going to do it in their own strength, and it's like, nope, you're not. You're gonna
Aren't you glad
me,
we
or
don't
it's
do
not
that?
gonna
We just
happen.
remember every time.
Yeah.
That'd
I
be
mean-
nice.
that's why my house is full of rocks. Literally. Not even lying.
Well, that and you guys do live not close to, but around an amethyst mine.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that's kind of awesome.
Yes.
If I lived there, my house, thanks to my wife, would be made of rocks.
Of rocks.
I think.
I mean, that's what been one of the great things about up there, is just the natural beauty
Oh yeah.
that, whether it be like the amethyst mine, or just being able to go
Or the Northern Lights.
or
yeah.
get away, just be able to go jump in the boat and get away from everybody. And sometimes you need to do that, because it's just like they're knocking on your door, and you just can't.
Yeah.
Not all the time can you feel like you can deal with it, or you feel up for it, but you find out pretty quick, like all that stuff's really great, but that's still not enough. Like that's not a reason to be there.
Yeah.
Like, because you can pretty quickly get overwhelmed by all the other stuff, and so you got to put your trust in the Lord and find your life in Him, and so.
Well, especially in a culture that's pervasively dark and depressing and discouraging, and there's a lot of hopelessness surrounding you. I mean, there's a lot of components like broken and non-existent marriages in First Nations people, fatherlessness, drug and alcohol addiction, as that's the primary way that we're going to handle our problems is alcohol. And then trying, from your perspective, to bridge those gaps into those cultures and communities, and even just dealing with your ethnicity that you're bringing to the table. Like those are all difficulties, and yet we can't live or die, find our joy or hope or fulfillment in just those things. It has to be, I'm finding them in the Lord. So maybe a good pulling ourselves back out of the pit a little bit here. What are some of the greatest joys that God has given you there? Things that you look back over the last couple years and you're like, man, that was so important.
I have a very recent one, even. When my dad was really sick, my mom and dad had come to visit us in Canada, and Dad got really sick just a couple days in, and had septic shock, and we have no ICU in our little town, and so he had to be flown to a bigger town with an ICU, better care, and he was there for a couple weeks there, and so that all of that was very difficult. But while we were there in Thunder Bay, I had one of our dear friends that we went and built a shed for. Her sister was there, having cancer treatment and stuff, and she's a believer in the Lord. And I ran into her one day while me and my mom were having lunch in the cafeteria, and it was just as if God had like put us both there intentionally on purpose, like her for me and me for her, and on my birthday, the one day when we were spending the day in the hospital, she wanted me to come in her room, and she had a gift for me, and it, I know she doesn't have much, and she gave me a lot, and it meant so much. And then she shared her testimony with me. And so like, it meant so much because like, yeah, it's dark and it feels hopeless. But yet she's one that has like come out on the other side, and she has a story to tell. And, so that was like really encouraging to me. Just that, there is hope, and, and she is proof of that. And so, yeah, I was just super thankful because I needed her during those couple weeks, and she was there. I know she was there praying for me and sending me messages and just encouraging me. And yeah, so it was just a sweet little gift from God, you know? So
I think for me, one thing has been probably especially while COVID was going on, we ended up spending more time pouring into the local church than we anticipated. So that wasn't something that we expected, but it was something that kind of happened out of like, well, we can't do this other thing. Let's do what we can.
Yeah.
And so there was a point where there was a guy who had been in the youth ministry, and he would preach with the pastor. They would kind of do it together, and then there was an elder that would preach every once in a while. But eventually, him and another guy were sent to be missionaries in Quebec, and so now, and the guy, the one of the elders, his wife got brain cancer, so now the pastor was kind of preaching on his own, and he had just come off a sabbatical the summer previous. This would have been like in the spring of the year. And he's like, I'm already kind of, running on fumes here because I've just been doing this a lot by myself. And it's like, have you ever done any preaching? And he said, in your missionary travels or at your church? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, would you be interested in doing that? And I was like, yeah, I've been kind of feeling like I should be doing that, but I'm not. And he's like, well, would you be interested in doing that? So I said yeah, and then I think for maybe a couple months it was at least 6 weeks. It was every other week or maybe 2 months, just kind of jumped in to help out. And we started, I think, at First Peter, and then we kind of talked about this practice that I saw when we were in Papua New Guinea, how they were training up all these young preachers, and every Sunday they would critique the sermon after the service. And I thought, man, maybe that would be good to do. Maybe we could start doing that. And so we talked about it for a while, and we started getting together. And then eventually we got to where we would kind of, we found these, I don't know what church it was from, some worksheet that just asked these questions, and we kind of graded each other. And so we kind of formed a preaching team, and we started doing that. Like every Tuesday we get together. And then eventually we pulled my teammate into it. And then as the elder that would preach, sometimes his wife started showing improvements with her brain cancer. It actually went into remission. And so he started coming, and then we got an interim youth pastor came on, and we started pulling him in there. So now we have a 5-person preaching team. And we've been doing that for a couple years now, where we critique our sermons, and
Yeah, it's awesome.
we changed it went from, I think, more preaching topically to expositionally. The church has made that shift. And so we preach through books of the Bible. Right now we're in John, and we just go in and we kind of like go through and kind of read and kind of lay out like, okay, I think here's a sermon, who's going to take this one, who's going to take that one, and hoping to take them to Simeon Trust this year.
Yeah.
Last year it was just my teammate and I that went, but I'm hoping to take some of the guys from there. But it's been great to see.
And Simeon Trust is the same thing that our preaching team has been going through.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And it's been great to see everybody grow in their preaching, and all of us have grown in our preaching.
Yeah.
And so,
well, and there was something Jen said, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was before we started, where you were talking about some advice in thinking about joys that they had given you.
Yeah, so actually just at our field conference this last August, one of the things that Steve Lesson had said in our group time was that our joy needs to be in a relationship and not in the outcome of our ministry or whatever. But so we need to be careful that our joy isn't connected to our ministry outcome, but that it's in Jesus,
Yeah.
our relationship with Jesus and our identity in Christ, like what Harold was even talking about on Sunday. So
How vital is that?
Yeah.
It's vital if you have left home and family and are like serving in Northern Ontario in a different culture. That's vital if you're living close to home and family. And you have all of those unreal expectations, and when disappointment comes, you're just blown out of the water. Like, we can't find our hope and our joy, our attachment for whatever the future holds, whatever God's sovereign plan holds for us. We can't attach our joy or sorrow to that based on the outcome that we want to see. It has to be tied underneath that. This is the bedrock foundation of my life and faith. It is who I am in Christ, who He has made me, what He has done and accomplished in me, what He's doing through me, even if I don't get to see it in my lifetime. And I mean, that's one of the things I know we've talked about with the ministry you guys are currently serving in. There's a chance that you guys and what you're serving in doesn't even make a dent in that culture for 40 years, like long ways out. So it's a good reminder for us who care about you, who love you, who are praying for you, who are supporting you. Number one, to do all those things, because you're in a tough spot, but also to learn from that, to model that in our own life and go, all right, so I may never in this life see the fruit of what I'm working on, but I'm still called to be a local missionary. Like when I go to school tomorrow, I'm a local missionary. When I go to work tomorrow, I'm a local missionary. Like how I engage with my neighbors. We just finished community groups reading Joining Jesus on His mission, on reaching out to neighbors, and that is the Great Commission. Like that we would take the good news, and yet we can't tie our identity to how people receive that good news or reject it.
Right.
We're just called to be faithful.
Yep.
So thank you to you guys for being faithful. I know you got to go. You got some place you got to be here pretty soon. We appreciate your faithfulness in serving in this season. I mean, God works with us in seasons, so that doesn't mean you have to live in Ontario forever. But also, like this, today's a great example of not feeling good and still being faithful. Just appreciate you guys a lot. So we'll continue praying for you. Just encourage those who are listening, continue financially supporting them, spiritually supporting them through prayer, emotionally supporting them by reaching out to them. I know they need it, and we're all in the ministry of the gospel together. So
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
thanks guys.
See ya.
Appreciate you. All right. Bye-bye.